the chat. And these are the points that we're going to be really focusing around this evening. So how can I prepare my home so it's ready for sale? How do I determine its value and what price do I list the property at? And we'll be looking at how you can choose the right estate agent and what are the best marketing and promotional strategies you can employ, and how I can find the best mortgage and solicitor for the conveyancing. Okay, so we're going to be mainly focusing on those areas tonight. But those of you who are joining us live tonight, do feel you can drop in any questions, and we will do our best to make sure they're answered. So if you type a question into YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, they should be aggregated and we should see those questions coming up, and we'll try and do our best to answer those as they come up. So what we're going to do now is focus a lot more on the topics for today. So obviously this is the headline for what we're going to be covering, and this is the first question which I'm going to do my best to try and answer. Okay, so it's really based around how you can prepare your home so it's ready for sale. And a few general tips. The first thing is, as much as possible, try and declutter your home and make sure it's really clean. Now, some of these things are very obvious, but people can understand houses lived in and with families, etc. So a home doesn't have to be perfect. It needs to feel like home. But certainly anything which gives a feeling of clutter or perhaps makes a room or a house feel crowded, as much as possible, try and deal with that before the property goes on the market. And if you're considering using an estate agent, they will try and assist you where they can and give you some good tips to follow. And certainly I would do as well. And indeed, you can find people who are very experienced in home staging as well, and we'll discuss that a little bit this evening as well. So also make sure any obvious repairs are done and upgrades. For example, if there is a little bit of shrinkage, differentiating shrinkage to perhaps cracks. Obviously, I'm not suggesting anyone tries to conceal anything here, but if you've got a little bit of shrinkage or a wall's got a few hairline cracks which have nothing significant, then obviously where possible, try and decoratively try and improve things and make good. And any broken fixtures, try and deal with them before the property goes on the market. And if you've got any, for example, you may have got a bit of water seepage, just try and deal with that. Quite often, for example, guttering, you get blocked gutters, and that can cause a problem with damp, for example. And it can be very cheap to actually get it fixed. But of course, that can spoil the paintwork and also damage walls. But if you deal with the underlying problem, which doesn't necessarily need to cost very much, again, that's going to be something which doesn't come up on a survey later on because you've already dealt with it. Obviously, a little bit of fresh paint. If you've got a certain room or certain rooms which are very, very bright, garish colours, you may want to consider toning that back a little bit. Obviously, colours, neutral colours like the whites, the creams, the magnolias, the greys are very popular at the moment. So that's something which you could consider. And where possible, do a little bit of home staging. So arrange furniture to showcase the space effectively. We've already talked about colours. Sometimes if you've got a house which is actually worth quite a bit of money, it's actually worth bringing someone in who can specifically advise you on how to stage your property for sale, because it's these things that can actually really help you to get a better price. And not only that, get people to the extent where they're almost falling over. They want to look at your property, but also wanting to actually potentially make an offer on it as well. Okay, so we've really dealt with how I can prepare my home for sale. The next point really around this is this whole thing is, how do I determine its value and what price to list the property at? Now, you would think the natural answer is to go to an estate agent and or a number of estate agents and get some valuations. And that's certainly a good thing to do. But what I would say is agents are if they know that they're in a competitive situation, they will have a tendency to deliberately overvalue the property, okay? Because people want to be told what they want to hear, okay? So I'm making this figure up here, but let's say your house was really worth £600,000, they might say it's worth 675 or 700,000, just because you'd be more likely statistically to give them the instruction on the sale. Okay, so take the figures that agents give you with a little bit of pinch of salt, and what you can do to make sure that the person you're speaking to actually knows what they're talking about is you can clearly ask them about their personal experience, but also ask them to come along with comparable evidence. Now, for example, when I see people, I'll actually take my laptop along with me and I'll go on to Rightmove, Zoopla, and other platforms and find other comparable properties. And also, these days, you can get a lot of past listing information. Now, the agent should be offering to do that for you, and it should be a highly interactive discussion so you can see for yourself what other properties have sold for or what similar properties are selling for in your current area. And make sure you compare the square footage or square meterage, and also make sure it's like for like as best as you can. Okay, so condition and location have a big part to play on that. And you also make sure that any agents you get in are registered with the property ombudsman service as well, because every agent by law is required to be registered with the property ombudsman, and it's about making sure that the agent you're working with is following things to the correct standard. So it's about using a local estate agent where possible. And this leads very nicely on into the next question, really, which is how do I choose the right estate agent? And the answer there is potentially to get 2 or 3 agents to come round, make sure they've got good, strong local knowledge, a good track record, and got positive client reviews. So you could look at Trustpilot, for example, and see whether they've reviewed anywhere there. Now, just bear in mind that it is possible to buy fake reviews. They're actually surprisingly easy to get, unfortunately, but there are telltale signs there, because if the reviews like one sentence or pretty meaningless, then you probably should discount that as a review. And make sure the agent you're speaking to is very well aligned to your personal goals and in terms of what you want to achieve. So look at their experience, and in particular, consider as well their knowledge of the local neighborhood. Now, the other thing around estate agents, there is a lot of corporate chains out there. Now, interesting enough, I used to be an agency a long time ago. I was in estate agency for 5 years, and at the time I decided to leave the field because everything was starting to go very corporate, and I didn't like that because I believe everything revolves around personal service. So for me, all the fun went out of it. But the world has actually done a full 360 degrees, because now you don't have to operate out of estate agency offices anymore. In fact, people don't really go into estate agency branches anymore like they used to years ago. They'll go onto sites like Rightmove and Zoopla. And but then obviously the skill of the agent really is more about how they handle you as an individual, both on the phone, but also the applicants. Now, there's one particular firm which I won't mention by name, but they're absolutely horrendous to deal with. They expect you to go through so many hoops that it would actually put most buyers off about making offers on particular properties. Also, you tend to find that the managers on the very large chains are just purely managers. They're not necessarily able to make the decisions in the way that you would like them to make the decisions. And you would think possibly if you were going to go use a large estate agency chain, that they would share their details across the branches. Well, in reality, they might say they do, but in theory, invariably, they are working in silos, and the information isn't as shared widely as you would expect. and possibly the incentives are not there for them to be able to cross-sell each other's properties. Now, with Rightmove and Zoopla on the market, you've got level playing field. So that really has flattened that all out now. So it's much more about personal service and experience. And look at their communication skills, look at the way they've communicated with you. And also, in particular, make sure that you look very hard at the contract. A lot of agents now, especially the corporate chains, are using sole agency agreements with sole selling rights. Now, years ago, sole agency agreements with sole selling rights were really frowned upon. And in fact, it was deemed to be a very bad thing to do, not from an agent's point of view, it's great, but from a customer point of view. So if you do have to ask to sign a sole agency agreement with sole selling rights, look at the terms. I see a lot of people being locked into 12, 14, 16. In fact, I spoke to someone yesterday who was locked into a 20-week contract. Well, that's very, very one-sided. Why would any agent expect any house seller to lock into a contract like that? It's really quite unreasonable, unless the agent is perhaps selling a very high value property as being asked to spend thousands of pounds up front. It's just really unreasonable. I personally believe you should be prepared to work on a 14-day contract. And I think you'll find the vast majority of agents won't do that. If you're prepared to work on a 14-day contract, it means you are very confident about your service. Okay, there really isn't a need to lock people into extended contract terms anymore. Sort of moving a little bit on from that now, moving on to the next point in terms of the best marketing and promotional strategies. Well, obviously, photography is vital. You would expect that's really a given. And actually, in fairness, a lot of agents do a fairly reasonable job with that. What I would say is, and most estate agents are not professional photographers. Okay. So in many cases, if an agent says, look, I actually bring someone in who takes the professional photographs for you, that actually is a really good sign, because agents tend to be good at selling properties. They're not necessarily good at presenting properties in the best possible light. Things like virtual tours as well are also very important. Now, they may offer to a 3-dimensional tour for you. Now, that looks pretty, but in reality, it's not very user-friendly. A lot of people get themselves lost in these so-called virtual tours. It's much better if an agent brings in a videographer as well, doesn't just necessarily use an iPhone, for example, or an Android. They've got a camera with a gimbal attached to it. Now, gimbal is a bit of a technical term, but it means that it smooths all the footage out. It looks really professional. And they should also be prepared, especially if your property is a really nice property, to incorporate possibly drone footage as well. It's all these things which really help to lift and elevate the chance of you selling your home. So high quality photographs, virtual tours can make a big difference. They allow potential buyers to visualize your home features and layout as well very effectively. And make sure as well that your property is going to be listed on at least the 2 major platforms. There's 3 major ones at the moment. There's Rightmove, Zoopla, and on the market. There are other lots of smaller ones as well, which can be well worth considering. But if an agent isn't on Rightmove, the reason they're not on there is because it's expensive. Okay, but at the end of the day, Rightmove is the granddaddy of them all. So really, your property has to be listed on Rightmove. They should also be listed really on Zoopla at the same time. Okay, on the market is good, but it's not absolutely essential. The other thing is that if you look at communities that you are perhaps a member of, do the agents that you're thinking of using interact a lot on social media communities like closed Facebook groups or on certain pages? What interactivity do they carry out, and will they try and market your property through different Facebook groups and pages? And do they use Instagram as well to actually, Instagram can be really effective now in terms of presenting properties and making it, if the agent is really good, it can be very, very engaging. And this is where video content really ties in as well as part of that. The agent should be prepared to also look at open house viewings, private showings. So what I mean by that, for example, if I tell you a little bit of a story relating to ourselves, about 2 years ago, we actually had an open house. So we basically made our home available for 4 hours. And basically viewings took about 6 different viewings took place. 2 didn't show, which is normal. 4 did show, and all 4 made an offer. And what actually ended up happening is it went on the market on the Saturday, or ready to be launched on the Saturday. By the Monday, we actually had 4 offers. And by Wednesday, one of those offers was accepted, because out of those 4 offers, 2 people went £20,000 over the asking price. And that was in a market which actually wasn't a bad market, but it also was just after the pandemic. So it wasn't that great. So being prepared to open viewings can be very, very effective, especially if you've got a good agent who's managing a lot of that for you. Okay. And obviously, if you've got a very high value home, then this is where private viewings can be particularly important. Right. So moving on really to the next point, and really this is the final point for today, and we're going to move then into open Q&A. And Tracy, if you've got 1 or 2 questions sort of lined up in a minute, it'd be really good to go into that. And if you're on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, etc., type your question in the chat, and we will try and deal with those in real time this evening. But Tracy, I think you've had 1 or 2 people email you in before, so just perhaps be good to go through those in just a minute, if that's okay. So now we're moving on really to the next point, which is really about mortgages and solicitors for conveyancing. We did have a really good mortgage broker online, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, and he's a whole of market mortgage broker. So just to explain it, when you go to your lender, they may just be tied into offering their own products. You may find that the mortgage broker presents themselves as having access to a wide number of different mortgage companies, but they may not be whole of market brokers. And then you can get brokers which are whole of market. Now, ideally, if you are looking to buy a property yourself, it is worth going to a whole of market broker, because invariably they can get better terms for you, or potentially get you a much better rate. Okay, and also it's very much bound by red tape now, unfortunately. On the plus side, they do actually have to give you decent comparables of what's available out there and the terms that are offered. And where that can be particularly useful is if, for example, you're a first-time buyer, or you need to go up to a much higher multiple than normal. Invariably, they've got routes to that type of finance as well. And those type of whole market brokers can be very good, as well as if you're into property investing. And we'll be having a session on that in about 2 weeks' time, on how you can raise funding to buy properties which enable you to go to rent, or has multiple occupation and so on, which is another topic for another day. So getting the right mortgage broker is really important. If, for example, you're considering buying a flat, just something I'd really suggest you look at very hard is look at the service charges on the flat or apartment you're considering buying. Look at the length of the lease. Now, you want a property which has really got at least 85 years left on the lease, if not more. Once it gets to about 85 years left on the lease, it starts to get much more difficult to mortgage, and also it has an negative impact on the property value. Okay. The other thing is that service charges can be a real killer. So, for example, you might be considering moving into a new build, and the service charges might be 1,000 a year at the moment, or 500 a year. but what will they be like in 3-5 years' time? Now, if, for example, it's a tower block and it's got lifts and large communal areas, you're going to suddenly find what might appear to be reasonable now will invariably go up dramatically in cost over the next 3 to 5 years. Now, that obviously is a consideration for you, but even more important, when you come to actually sell your property, you could get stuck with a white elephant where it becomes very difficult to sell. So people hate properties with high service charges. Also, lenders are very, very resistant to it as well. And what you'll find as well is that when it comes to affordability criteria, lenders will factor in the cost of service charges, and it has a dramatic impact on the multiple you can be used to borrow against. So don't underestimate that part of it. If you're going to consider a flat, it's always much better to buy something which is probably in a building where it's got no more than 3 or 4 floors, okay? Because then as a general rule of thumb guide, it's going to be much easier to sell later on. Things like solicitors are also really important. Now, these days, again, corporate firms agents will perhaps recommend their own solicitors, and they may not be proper solicitors, they might be mortgage conveyancers. Now, the trouble is, some of those are just sausage machines, and you find the service levels really aren't there. The agents might say the service levels are there, but not there. For example, we've recently moved just in the last 2 months. Now, admittedly, our situation was a little bit different, but I said to our solicitor that we wanted to exchange contracts in 2 weeks. This is from start to finish. And we also wanted to complete in 4 weeks. And we got the builder to agree to it. And we actually said to the solicitor, if we actually instruct you on this purchase, will you do everything in your power to make sure you exchange contracts in 2 weeks? And the agent came back to us with not a cast iron guarantee, because going to give that, but in reality, they actually managed to achieve that to the day for exchange, and they managed to complete on exactly the date that we wanted to complete on. So from the very start to exchanging contracts to completion, we were actually in within 4 weeks. Okay, so now I'm not saying that's necessarily realistic in most cases, because typically there are chains. Invariably, someone's got a problem with either selling a property, or maybe someone at the top of the chain hasn't found something. But it's worth using a solicitor which is happy to measure, their own performance. And again, look for things like Trustpilot reviews, and check to see whether they look genuine as well. It also would tend to indicate a solicitor's a bit more switched on as well. Okay, so if you need some guidance on that, just obviously do reach out. I'll try and point you in the right direction. And also, this is going back to when you're raising finance, obviously mortgage brokers, they might well get a fee from the bank or the building society, or they may look to you to make a contribution towards the fees. But also with things, we talked a little bit about agency fees earlier on. Well, we talked about being very wary about sole agency agreement, sole selling rights. Okay. But also the length of the contract you need to look at, but also make sure the agent is being competitive. Now, what I mean by that, it doesn't mean to say a small agent should be cheaper than a larger agent. In reality, because they're providing more personal service, you might find they're actually dearer. But at the end of the day, if you feel comfortable with that agent and you believe they're going to provide you a good service, then it can be worth paying for that. So really, as far as the discussion today is concerned, we've covered all the salient points. So really, it's about opening it up to questions. And I'll just bring up today's topic again, so you can see that was today's topic. And Tracy, I'm going to bring you back in, if that's okay, if I can figure this out. There we go. So this is what we've been discussing tonight. Tracy, have you got some questions that people would like to have answered?
Yeah, we've got some that came in previously that are in the comments, so I'm not sure if we can get them to come up.
Okay. I can see that we've got someone here who's asking about staging. Yeah, I've had some really good questions there. Perhaps we'll deal with those here, actually. Now, staging, you tend to quite often find someone who might be a bit of an interior designer, for example. They may do a lot of work with a number of builders, for example, or building companies who might actually be involved with creating show homes. But they tend to be very localized, and you probably want to use someone very local to you, because if someone has to travel some distance, you're going to probably pay quite a bit over the odds for it. So if you probably speak to your local agents, and they're there to guide you on people who specialize in property staging. An agent should be able to give you a little bit of advice as well. But the only thing is, sometimes agents are a bit nervous about saying exactly what they think or what they feel, for risk for upsetting the seller. And of course, then that can mean that they're not necessarily being entirely truthful about your home. Okay, so it is worth possibly considering bringing someone on who's with those professional skills. If it's someone around here in the Tunbridge Well, Horsemonden, Maidstone, Paddock Wood, Hawkhurst, Crowborough areas, then I potentially could easily introduce you to one of the people who may well be able to help. But if you're not in that space, by all means message me and I'll see where I can find something out. But hopefully that will help a bit on that one, Tracy. So I can see there's someone else asked a question here. Yeah, in fact, it's a really good thing in terms of posting your own house on social media. You could, of course, try and do that yourself. But the difficulty is, if you're trying to do it yourself, people you'll find that purchasers can take advantage. And this is really where it does pay to have an agent. When you're selling your home, you want a really good estate agent, because remember, they're acting you as for the seller, not for the buyer. Okay, so and they will handle a lot of the difficult negotiation. But for example, when we take a property on the market, we'll automatically put it out on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Not so much LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is more of a professional network, unless you're trying to appeal to businesses for relocation purposes. But as part of that, if, for example, you are a member of different Facebook groups, certainly I would be, and most agents would be very happy for you to share those posts in your own social networks as well, and that will also help to speed up the sales process. And Tracy, I can see another one here in the chat as well for mortgage broker and solicitor. It's not vital really to use a mortgage broker or solicitors local to you. For example, there is a very good broker I know who's actually based up in Hull, which obviously is the other end of the UK, certainly from where I live. It's actually far more down to the experience of that broker, and again, whether they've got access to the whole of market, not just on a panel of perhaps 10 or 12 lenders. You want really a whole of market broker as well. Okay, solicitors, again, I would try and avoid the conveyancing farms. They may be a lot cheaper, but at the end of the day, when you're trying to sell your house or purchase another one, you just want really good service. So I take the view, I'm prepared to pay a bit more for it, that service, if I know the solicitor is going to be really good at representing my interests and working to a timescale that I want them to work at. And unfortunately, solicitors do have a bit of a tendency to be a little bit slow, and they love writing to each other, when quite often just emailing someone, or better still, picking up the phone, can actually, between different solicitors or different agents, can really speed things up. So no, there's not a need to go local there. If you've had a good experience with the solicitor in the past, stay with them. But just more look at their reputation, okay, and try and avoid the conveyancing farms. That's invariably where you will find you won't really get the right type of service. Have we got any other questions coming through, Tracy, or do you have any personal questions you would like to have answered today?
I think that's most of them that have been covered that we've had come in.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we've covered most things in pretty good time, actually, because I normally allow up to an hour for these sessions today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to explain a little bit more about what we're covering next week and how to get in touch. But if you've got some questions in the meantime, type them in the chat and I will try and interact with you while we're still on this session today. So I'm just going to move forward to the next slide. So this is the session that we are covering next week. This is again at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, the 3rd of July. And the question is, what 6 questions should I be asking my estate agent before listing my home? Okay, I've given you a few clues on it tonight, but actually we go into much more depth on that next week. Okay, and the week after is a big focus on property investing, and then shortly after that we're going to be doing a bit of fun round to the Armchair Dragons Club, which is not really so much related to property, but it's about being involved in businesses. So we're just trying to line something up on that at the moment. So this is what we're going to be discussing next week. Do put, even after today's live session, do drop your questions in the chat on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or wherever you're communicating from, and I will try and get back to you if I possibly can. And really sort of moving on from there, if you want to reach out to me personally, there's 2 ways of really doing it. So I'll bring up the links to the next page. Tracy, you may want to put your own phone number in the chat in a moment, or in the comments, so it just feeds out on the social platforms. But if you want to engage with me personally, I can help you with either finding another property or selling. But also I run the Wealth Growth Club, and the links for me personally here are on this slide here. So my mobile number is 07912 600 999. What I would say on that, if you can, ideally text me or WhatsApp me, because then I can call you back. So if I'm with a client, I generally would let it go to voicemail. And that's my personal email address there, and also the email address associated to the whole property estate agency side. And those are the URLs. So if you're on Facebook, you've got the URL there. That's YouTube and so on. Yeah, so I think we are pretty well a wrap, unless any other questions have come in, Tracy.
Not that I can see. We've had a few. We had all the email ones that I've put up, haven't we?
Yeah, lovely. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining in this evening. Tracy, thank you for your assistance as always. And
you're welcome.
We'll look forward to seeing you next week. And yeah, thank you very much indeed for joining in today. Cheers. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.